So welcome everybody. Today, the title of our workshop is Embodied Practices for Healing Trauma and Addiction with Jan Winhall. Trauma and addiction heal in tandem with this paradigm-shifting approach. Jan Winhall's Felt Sense Polyvagal Model integrates Stephen Porges' neuroscience with Eugene Gendlin's embodied wisdom, offering 20 somatic practices to rewire the nervous system and promote healing. These accessible exercises can be completed individually with a Felt Sense partner in a peer support community, for instance. As Jan states, there is, in fact, a better way to understand trauma and addiction, a way that honors the wisdom of the body while integrating the latest findings in neuroscience, a way that creates a new social movement of liberation away from being shamed and pathologized just for responding in ways that have not been appropriately understood. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Jan. Jan brings 40 years of experience as a social worker and psychotherapist who approaches addiction through this non-pathologizing lens. During her career, she has observed clients using self-harming behaviors as coping mechanisms to regulate overwhelming emotional states. She discovered these behaviors, though destructive, served as adaptive responses that often became compulsive and addictive. Jan challenges traditional understandings of addiction, noting that while addiction rates continue to rise globally with devastating consequences, conventional treatment approaches often don't address the full complexity of addiction. And I must say, it's a pleasure to know you, Jan. I've gotten to know you quite well recently and over the past, it was 2.5 years ago, I think, when you were last here. It's just so great to have you back. And now I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Patrick. It's really, it's lovely the way we've made this connection together. And I think there's something about what we're sharing with each other that's really resonating in both of our communities, and that's very exciting to see. So I know that some of you have some training in polyvagal theory, and I know Dana has been here and shared with you as well. I want to just start by, before I go into the PowerPoint, just by saying that my own history with addiction really started, I guess, with my dad, who struggled a lot with binge drinking. And also in later years, he and I, because of this work that I did and shared with him, I think we really got to a place of him understanding his own struggles with sex addiction. And I've never actually said that out loud before, here, publicly. But my dad's gone now, and I know that he would know that I was sharing it in a space that I feel safe, right? That people could understand and that I can talk about. And so a lot of my work has been in the area of sex addiction, because I think with so many of us, we end up in places that resonate with our history and trying to figure ourselves out. And while I think my dad and I got to a place of understanding some of his struggle, it was difficult along the way. And I was hurt by some of his behaviors, for sure. And then the other piece of how I relate to addiction was my own experience of being addicted to my first real relationship. So it was a kind of losing myself in this young person and absolutely panicking at the thought of him leaving. And I knew there was something desperately wrong about that. And so that got me into therapy very early on. I think I was 17 or something. And luckily, I found this amazing therapist who was into meditation and a deep way of being really respectful and very human, very, very human in his relationships with his clients. And so I brought all of that into the work that I started to do fresh out of grad school with a group of young women who were sexual abuse survivors. They were actually incest survivors. And I was just kind of thrown into this group and told to lead it. And so that was very overwhelming at the time, and I did absolutely get vicarious trauma. But at the same time, I learned everything that is the most important to learn in that group with those young women. And I still have relationships with a few of them now, actually. So I'm going to share with you kind of the theoretical part of it, bring in Steve Porges' wonderful work, and also my somatic teacher, Eugene Gendlin, and the beautiful work of focusing and felt sensing. If you don't know about that yet, I think you'll find it really powerful. And then we're going to do a practice. And the thing I want to say about that is that, you know, it's very scary often for people to go into their bodies, especially when we're struggling with addictive behaviors, because the whole idea there, right, is to not go into the body, because that's the place where it really hurts. And so whenever I do somatic practices, I always start by saying, you know, there's absolutely no expectation that you should or need to, at this point in time, in this moment, close your eyes and go into the center of your body. Your body's nervous system won't let you anyway, probably, or it will freak out. So you do what's right for you, as Eugene Gendlin would say. And we'll start with, I like to start with just noticing what's around us and pausing. So seeing whether you feel safe in your body to pause, right? To slow everything down a little bit. Because in order to connect with ourselves, we have to be able to do that. And if it doesn't feel safe to do that, that's just fine. That just shows you that right here and now, in this moment, it doesn't feel safe to do that. And that's where you need to be right now. So you could just listen to the rest of the practice. There's nothing that says that your body is wrong or sick or bad because it wouldn't feel safe to soften your gaze and close your eyes and come inside. But you're certainly welcome to share the practice and listen. So we'll do that at the end because I want to take you through some of the ideas, and then we bring those ideas down into the body and see if they actually make sense. Because so much of the ideas and the concepts and the theories that we come up with now in this very top-down world that we live in, they don't actually make sense in the body at all. So Gendlin's brilliance was that he said, okay, let's develop a theory. And he actually developed a whole philosophy that actually reflects and embodies what we experience in our lives. Okay, so this is a model that I put together for my own journey, trying to figure out myself, my parents, the world around me, and certainly with my clients over, well, 45 years now doing this work. So this is my group of women, these young women that were all sitting in this room together in a hospital setting. Most of them were inpatients in a psychiatric unit. They'd all been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, and they were all being treated, I have to say, pretty badly. A lot of them, mostly they were like, it was like the psychiatrists were like, we don't know what to do with these women. They're cutting their bodies. They're setting themselves up to be abused again. They're selling their bodies. They're horrible to work with. You deal with it. And it really was like that. It really was that kind of message. And, you know, regardless of what kind of framework they were using, I didn't buy it because no framework should produce those kinds of attitudes. I think things are a bit better now, but I'm not sure they're a lot better in the psychiatric system now for folks that are really struggling with self-harming behaviors. And it was really the early feminist therapists that I could resonate with and who helped me to begin to understand what was going on for these young women. And in Laura Davis and Ellen Bass's book, this is a beautiful book. If you haven't read it, it's called The Courage to Heal, was written in 1988. It's just a beautiful book. And they said, the problems survivors experience with their bodies, splitting and numbing and addictions, began as attempts to survive. Well, this is polyvagal theory. This is Steve's work around understanding the autonomic nervous system and how bodies will do these counterintuitive things like self-harm with cutting and addictions, drinking a lot, using a lot of drugs, ways of numbing the body in order to be able to shut down. And what we would say from a polyvagal lens is, yes, this was it's an adaptive thing to do when you don't feel safe, because it numbs you. And that numbing, that dissociation, is protective. So it was Judith Herman in her book, Trauma and Recovery, brilliant book, brilliant woman, who noticed and understood these behaviors through the autonomic nervous system. So she said, abused children generally discover at some point that they can produce major, though temporary, alterations in their affective state by inducing autonomic crisis or extreme autonomic arousal. This is the flight-fight place in the body. And that the feelings can be most effectively terminated by a major jolt to the body. The most dramatic method of achieving this result is through the deliberate infliction of injury. So here we see Judith Herman understanding that self-harming behaviors like cutting, for example, shifts the body, jolts the body in a dramatic way into another nervous system state that helps us to survive. Herman goes on to say that while self-injury is the most spectacular soothing mechanism, children find many other ways to induce major alterations in affective states. And this goes for adults as well. Purging and vomiting, compulsive sexual behavior, compulsive risk-taking or exposure to danger, and the use of psychoactive drugs become the vehicles by which abused children attempt to regulate their internal emotional and physiological state. And we'll come into this more as we go along. So what I saw with these women was that all kinds of things were happening in their bodies. They were either shutting down in that, what we call in polyvagal land, the dorsal branch of the vagus nerve, the longest cranial nerve in the body that monitors how safe we feel in our bodies. That's the vagus nerve. And it runs right throughout the whole center of our body, bringing information from all the different organs in our body up to the brainstem, which is the part of the brain, the most basic, primitive part of the brain that's just about survival. The dorsal branch of the vagus is the one that Steve Porges named, and that's the place that's engaged in the vagus nerve when we're numbing and shutting down. And I could see this in these women. Their bodies would hunch over and they were collapsed. You couldn't see, you couldn't find them in their eyes. And this is often where we go in addiction, because it brings relief. It brings dissociation. And when there isn't enough safety, this state is actually a gift. It's a gift to us. How do we bear these things? How do we bear this pain unless we can anesthetize it? So we're moving from understanding the behaviors as maladaptive behaviors into really shifting a paradigm, into understanding these behaviors as adaptive features of this beautiful process in the body that seeks our safety. And so in order to be able to make that shift in paradigms, we need to be able to bring in the body. So in the traditional way now, we are bypassing the body and focusing so much on CBT and all of these kind of thought ways of changing behavior. Those ways are great, but they don't work if we don't pay attention to the most primitive way the body's responding in order to seek survival. So the first piece we have to do to be able to do then is to pause. And Gendlin's wife called this the revolutionary pause. Because if we all really felt safe enough in our bodies to be able to slow down and pause, it would be revolutionary. Because when you come into the body, if we're really connected to who we are, something beautiful happens. And I think this happens for you in your groups. It happens in groups that feel safe. In my women's group, we created this kind of safety where we could slow down and pause and feel into each other's presence. So I went searching for how could I help these people feel more connected to themselves and to their bodies. And I found Eugene Gendlin's work. So Gendlin wrote this little book called Focusing way back in I think it first came out in 78. And focusing works with what he called the felt sense. And what he found in studying people, therapists and clients who both reported really positive outcomes in the therapy, was that, surprise, surprise, they were connected to their bodies. They were feeling the full sense of being alive. And they felt safe enough to really be able to experience life deeply, to feel a sense of meaning and purpose and intimacy and connection, all the things that are so often wounded places in addiction. So he said, okay, if some people just know how to connect in there and hear this kind of voice back there in the back of our head that talks to us and tells us, and the body talks to us through tightness in the stomach or a headache, things that, when we're not sick, but there's something bugging us. And so he decided that if we created little steps, we could help people who are disconnected from their bodies to find their way into this intuitive kind of liminal space between consciousness and unconsciousness. It's the place where you feel uncomfortable because you knew you forgot something. And then when you remember what it was, there's this aha feeling. And there's a release, right? There's a physical release in the body. Or it's the place where if you know something's bugging you, but you don't know what it is, and then you're lucky enough to find maybe somebody to keep you company and listen to what's happening inside, and maybe take you through the 6 steps of focusing like we do in our partnerships. You slow things down. You can start with step 1 where you clear some space. This is a mindfulness practice. Clear out the space, take each of the issues and put them aside. And then notice that there's something there. Maybe it's like an ache in your throat or your tummy. And you allow yourself to stay with it. So this is the opposite of what we do in addiction, right? We run from it because it hurts too much. It's too overwhelming. It feels too unsafe to be present. So you can see that this process takes time. We titrate slowly to come back into the body to create safety. And then we work with that. We get what we call a handle for that connection of that place there in the throat or the tummy. And then we ask our partner, the handle's kind of a word or an image that captures the quality of what that is, that issue that's sitting there, stuck maybe in your throat. Often these things appear in kind of colors or shapes. They come from the right hemisphere. So we're down in the body, we're being carried with our partner who's listening. Partnerships in AA are so important too, right? Sponsorships. So we use the partnership model too in polyvagal theory because it's all about co-regulating and having your partner say back what the essence of that is in there and resonate it with you. And then in step 5, we might get a little curious about it. You know, what's the worst of that place? Or what does that place need in there? And often there's a little child part in there, a wounded part in there that needs to be heard. And then sometimes we'll feel like this lovely felt shift that comes with that. It's like, oh yeah, that's what's going on. I'm scared. Or that's what's going on. I'm really angry. And when we find the fullness of that, often it shifts. We feel a release. We can welcome what was uncomfortable there instead of running away from it or trying to talk ourselves through it. And then our body carries us through to the next step of where we need to go. We use body cards a lot in the work that we do. And this is a body card of somebody who's really describing a felt shift she has in her body through her focusing session. So there's a heavy grief that she carries in her belly. And while she's with her focusing partner and they look for a resource, some good energy in the body, we're going to do that in the end in our practice, looking for something to find that helps with this place that it feels too overwhelming to be with. And we can often find a place like that, even if it's just a little moment. And our partner co-regulates with our own nervous system and helps us to settle and feel safe enough in the body. So we have partnerships in focusing just like you do. And in this model of polyvagal understanding of addiction, we actually use a learning model of addiction, moving away from the sickness model and bringing in all of the new information about neuroplasticity. So Mark Lewis, if you don't know his work, he's a friend of mine. He lives in Toronto here, where I am. He wrote this wonderful book called The Biology of Desire. Mark was a heroin addict before he became a neuroscientist. He's quite a character, quite a beautiful person, amazing writer. So he says, addiction can therefore be seen as a developmental cascade, often foreshadowed by difficulties in childhood, always boosted by the narrowing of perspective with recurrent cycles of acquisition and loss. Like other developmental outcomes, addiction isn't easy to reverse because it rides on the restructuring of the brain. Like other developmental outcomes, it arises from neuroplasticity, but its net effect is a reduction of further plasticity, at least for a while. Addiction is a habit, which, like many other habits, gets entrenched through a decrease in self-control. So Mark takes us through these 5 different areas of the brain that are involved in addiction. And one of the things that I really think is so important to understand from a neuroscience perspective is that, you know, on the left side, you see these 5 different areas of the brain, and he's given them new names on the right side to make it easier to understand. So really getting in your body, getting that the bridge of the ship, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, up here between, it's like where the third eye is, the executive functioning part of the brain. This is the most sophisticated part of the brain. It gets really sleepy. It gets really inactive in addiction and trauma. So when you're stuck in that state of overwhelm, the nervous system is shifting back and forth from flight, fight into shutting down and then back again. We call this the trauma feedback loop. This is where addictions live. This bridge of the ship that helps you organize your life, delay gratifications, set expectations and goals for yourself, all of that part of the brain gets sleepy. It's also the place where we really hold moral values. That gets sleepy too, because we don't care about that stuff when the primitive part of the brain is helping you to stay alive. So the emotional spray paint, the amygdala, the flight fight, this is where the flight fight response happens, where we're freaking out. It takes over and our thinking brain and the value system that we believe in ends up getting really sleepy. So this is why good people can do bad things. And it's very important for us to understand this, that when we're just trying to survive and make it through the night, moral values are not on the table. And so this is a very helpful way of understanding how we can heal shame. So what happens in terms of neuroplasticity, the idea that cells keep replicating themselves, and so the brain actually can change and heal a tremendous amount. And that's the good news, because we can build these new neural pathways through our practices, like meditation, like focusing felt sense practice. We can do that. The problem is that in addiction, when you're in that trauma feedback loop of flight, fight, freeze, and then shutting down, the more you travel through that addictive pathway, the more it becomes a rut. It's just like wheels spinning in a rut. The more you try to get out of that rut, that neural pathway that becomes stuck, the deeper down you go into the pathway. And that's why it's so hard to build these new neural pathways and to get out of that path, that rut of seeking out those behaviors. Because the more we go down, the deeper down we fall. The good news is, though, that we can do it. And we can do it with the power of groups. And we can also do it with psychoeducation, understanding that when we do these daily practices, these somatic practices, not just CBT practices, but somatic practices and spiritual practices, we come into the body. And this is where we're building these new neural pathways. Like you would in a forest, you know? You go down a pathway in a forest, the first little while you can't really see the pathway, but eventually it becomes quite dampened down, and you can walk down there and you know where you're going, you can see it. And so this is the hopeful part of really bringing in and updating the way that we understand addiction as a very bad habit that is developed through neuroplasticity in the brain. So we're moving into these new ways, a new paradigm to understand, oh, so first of all, what is the definition of addiction? Well, I like to keep it really simple. It helps you in the short term, it hurts you in the long term, and you have trouble stopping doing it. You might stop for a while, but then you fall back in again. So that means also it can be anything. You can get addicted to any kind of behavior. It's not just about drugs and alcohol. So we, over many years of working with clients and with students, we made this very embodied model of the nervous system. And we use color and shape because the nervous system really likes that, and the body really loves colors and shapes. This really lights up the right hemisphere where the body is kind of, the imagery is stored in the brain. So down in the bottom, we have what we call flock, and this is the ventral branch of the vagus nerve, the cranial nerve that comes right up through the body. The ventral branch is above the diaphragm, and it comes right up through our throat, up into our face. So when we feel safe and calm, you can see it in our faces, right? We can give these cues of safety to each other. We can smile, we can make eye contact. This is the social engagement system that Steve talks about, Steve Porges. In that state, we feel a full felt sense of presence. And then if we get threatened, we shift into flight fight. That's the sympathetic branch of the nervous system. And you can feel that in your body with constriction. We're mobilizing. We're trying to either fight back or to run away. And for those of us that grew up in trauma, when you can't do either of those things, it isn't safe to fight back, and you can't run away as a little kid. What happens then? Then we shift over into what Steve Porges named as that dorsal branch of the vagus nerve, the place of immobilization, of shutting down and hibernating in order to be able to survive. So then we also have what we've characterized as 4 blended states in the nervous system. And the first one of these I called fun and fired up. So I think we probably live a lot in our experiencing in blended states in the nervous system. Like often, like right now when I'm presenting, I feel a kind of fun and fired up place in my body. I feel safe. But I also have a little bit more adrenaline and cortisol pumping because I'm presenting and I want to stay on track and whatever. And that's where we play as well. It's a fun place to be. There's also this beautiful place of flowing, and that's a blending of feeling safe and still. So the dorsal branch, when we feel safe, is this beautiful way that we can be still in the body. And here's where we have our meditation practices, our focusing practices, love making, connecting and cuddling, these beautiful experiences in life, spiritual places of prayer. And then what's really interesting for us in addiction is fixate, freeze, and fawn. And this is the blended state where addictions occur. Because what we're doing in that addictive place, remember Judith Herman's work, and with these young women in my group, is we're shifting back and forth from sympathetic to dorsal to sympathetic to dorsal and back to sympathetic. And when we do that, we cannot stay in either fight, flight, or in the dorsal fold and collapse forever because the body would die. So in a sympathetic state, you know how your body's pumping like crazy, pumping energy and whatever. It's too metabolically taxing. And in the dorsal state, the heart rate slows down and you can die if it goes really low. So addictions serve as what we call state regulation strategies that shift us from one dysregulated state to the other and then back again. And when you think about it, it makes sense that if you're in a sympathetic flight-fight state, for example, and you drink a bottle of wine, you are going to fall into a dorsal fold, and it will bring you relief. If you're in a dorsal fold state of numb, over here it can feel almost dead, and you cut your body, some people, when they see the blood, it scares them, and that shifts them back up into flight-fight. And that has to happen in order to survive. And when we don't feel enough safety, then we're going to find those ways, whatever they are, that will trigger that shift in state. Favoring others for survival is an interesting one. This is what people often call appeasement. When we're favoring others and appeasing, we're living in this trauma feedback loop, but we also have some awareness of what we're doing. So that's different than, say, the parent who is stuck in a dissociative folding down state a lot of the time, unaware of abuse that's happening maybe to herself or her children. In this state, there is some awareness of what's going on. And down here in the yellower part of the model, this signifies more connection to the body, more connection to soma, to the felt sense. And so we call this down here the empowerment feedback loop. And that's where we want to go. So in working with this model, we basically teach 2 skills. One of them is orienting to the 7 Fs. Where am I right now in my body? And learning about that, where you are in your body, when you can say, oh my God, yeah, I'm up there, I'm in the trauma feedback loop. No wonder I'm really struggling, because that's a very lonely place. That's a very lonely and isolated place because connection doesn't feel good. And this is where we live when we're struggling with addiction and self-harm. And while that's painful to see, it's validating. It's like, okay, now I know where I am. And when you know where you are, you can make some choices. And then over on the other side is teaching the 6 steps of focusing. So we're slowly helping people to come into the body. And the more you can move in and around that circle, the more you're finding this safe ventral vagal energy in the body. So here we see the addiction pathway, and that addictions function as state regulation survival strategies in the autonomic nervous system. So it's a complete shift from seeing addictions as maladaptive behaviors to seeing addictions as adaptive behaviors in maladaptive environments. And this really helps us to understand and appreciate the wisdom of the body. I mean, really, how else could you survive torture without having the capacity to dissociate? And in order to have the capacity to dissociate, you also have to be able to shift back into sympathetic, or you're going to die. So how do you do that? You do that with drugs and alcohol and behaviors that trigger sympathetic and dorsal states. So we have this bidirectional feedback loop. Felt sensing is an interoceptive practice in the body, connecting us to what we're sensing inside. And then neuroception is Steve Porges' word for the awareness of this process in the body that monitors how safe we are unconsciously. Right? We don't think about it. So here's our 2 skills that we teach. And we teach them in partnership so that people check in with each other. Again, triggers then become these different ways of understanding, oh, these are these wounded places that want our attention. And then we learn how to titrate, working with the felt sense, asking different questions that help people. For example, in flight fight, you might say, if this is too overwhelming a place to be, can we take 3 steps back together? Your partner might say to you. So there are many different ways that we work with focusing. And here's an example of the body cards where people are shifting from this dorsal sympathetic state of fixate freeze into flop as they quiet things down and listen to what's happening inside. So then helping ourselves, and those of you that work with other folks as well, to determine, well, what are these behaviors that I do that help me to shift states? And when did I start them? And can I stop them? And some of them are very helpful. Others are not helpful because you get stuck in this rut. And then what we do to bring it all together is we do this thing called the 4-circle harm reduction practice. This comes from Patrick Cairns' work. Some of you will be familiar with his work. He's very much part of the 12-step program and the gentle path. And he started a 3-circle practice, which I really liked. So I brought in the nervous system into it, and we'll just briefly go through this. So this is an example, say, of somebody that I would be working with. And in conjunction with their body and their nervous system, we would build out these 4 circles, which is like a roadmap for really healing over time, over weeks or months or whatever. And this person is working on, in that inner circle, these are the behaviors that you're ready to reduce harm with. So this person's looking at limiting to 2 desserts a week, not smoking weed, and not watching porn. That those 3 things tend to go together in his journey. The 2nd circle are the triggers, right? The autonomic states that we go into when we feel things in our lives like loneliness. Loneliness underlines almost all addictive behaviors. And then stuff in your life, conflicts at work, fighting with your partner, could be systemic issues like racism or misogyny, things that were happening, like changes in the COVID restrictions during this time when I was working with this person. The 3rd ring are those beautiful flock practices. A lot of folks, you know, in the beginning, it's like, you don't have a lot of these. What are these things that you do that bring this beautiful, calm, connected, grounded place? So building those with people. It could be things as simple as, you know, playing hockey with your friends. Other things like, you know, developing your focusing partnerships, daily check-ins with your map, with your partner. And then the fourth ring are the deeper, more spiritual practices. And Robert Ragucci, who's here with us today, hello, Robert, he was the one who said to me, we need a fourth circle, Jan. And when he said it, I recognized absolutely, yes, we need to have these practices that go deeply into a spiritual place. And I know that's a big part of the 12-step movement as well. So in the focusing accountability partnerships, we're using understanding where you are in your nervous system, learning how to work with your feelings through focusing, and then having your roadmap of what are the things you've committed to in order to be accountable, which we know is really important in working with addiction, right? And here's a body card from someone who is in a focusing session, and then is recalling this binge eating episode. And you see these sparkly things at the top of her head, this dorsal energy of the black cage weighing the body down. But in the end, this person is not able to move into a shift. And there's this feeling again of just this addictive crash at the bottom. And this is an example of a body card with someone who's moving from week to week in their focusing sessions. But they actually do really find this place of flow, because the partner in the second body card, you'll see this question in the middle of the body: what does this place need? And from that, in this deep place inside herself, her body took her back to this creek at the back of her yard where she would go to hide when all hell was breaking loose at home. It was a beautiful example. So this model of understanding addictions and self-harm through the body is about surviving. It's not about being sick, and it's not about being a bad person. It's about survival. This is what bodies do. They go to addictive behaviors in order to survive. And if we do our work and we can shift into embodiment, we come back into this empowerment loop in the body. And that's a place of thriving in life, and a place where lots of us get to on this journey. But we don't get there alone, right? We get there together. And it really brings these moments of liberation. It's like, you're not a bad person. You're not doing weird things. You're doing things that your body was designed to do to keep you alive in an environment that is not safe. And so we're now working with, coming up in May, polyvagal groups that we're starting. Robert, actually, who's with us today, is one of the leaders of my Felt Sense Polyvagal groups for healing trauma and addiction. And they're going to be based on my new book. This is my first book, Treating Trauma and Addiction, and this is the new book. So we're going to go through those 20 embodied practices with breakout room leaders together in focusing partnerships in community. So I'm going to come back to gallery view so I can see you all. So we're going to do a practice called the Felt Sense Polyvagal Grounding Practice. And this is lovely. It takes us into the body. And then we come into exploring the nervous system. And then we go into finding a felt sense of grounding. So nothing, this is a resourceful resilience kind of practice that you would come back to in order to then be able to go in and be with something that's uncomfortable. So first, we would always find something in the body that's a resource, because we don't want to go back into something uncomfortable without help. This is what Jean would say. Don't go there without help, because you're just re-traumatizing yourself. There's nothing new about that. So we'll start with this beautiful practice. And I really, again, want to say, for those of you in this moment with bodies that are not going to shut their eyes, good for you. Fine. That's fine. You can listen if you would like to. And just notice it may be that what happens is as we slow things down a little bit, that your body can just listen and begin to come in a little tiny bit with us. So you might want to stand up, check and see. Some people like to move when they focus and go inside. Some people like to sit. So just get a sense of what's right for you. And we'll just do a little 5-7 minute practice. And then we'll come back for Q&A. So slowing things down a little bit. And then just starting by noticing what's in the room around you. And you might find yourself just being drawn to something in the room where you'd like to pause. You might want to take a breath. And feel your feet on the floor. And then gently and lovingly soften your gaze. And then bringing your awareness somewhere down into the center of your body. And we're going to say hello to this beautiful part of the body, the vagus nerve. It runs right up your spine into your neck, that monitors how safe we are right now. I'm just going to say hello to this beautiful part of the body. And one way of really getting to know your nervous system is through your muscles. So just notice if your muscles, how they're feeling right now. Those big muscles in your legs and your arms, across your shoulders, your jaw. And just check to see if there's some constriction, some tightness anywhere in there. When we feel some fight energy, mobilizing energy, the body's muscles constrict, right? They get tight because they're ready to go, right? So you just notice, are you ready to go in your body with maybe some clenching? And then notice the feeling in there. Is it like a scared, anxious kind of feeling? Or it might be an irritated, angry feeling in there. Just checking to see what it's like in there. Or you may find that your muscles are more kind of on that heavy, dark side, full and heavy and lethargic. And then maybe some feeling around sadness or a kind of depression. Or maybe even just shutting down and numbing, just not really feeling much of anything. This is where it's hard to get out of bed, hard to make yourself move. It's not a great feeling. It's like, ugh. This is the dorsal branch of the vagus that Steve Porges named for us. And then in addiction, we're shifting back and forth between this heaviness and then up into tightness and constriction, and then do whatever we need to do to help bring into collapse again. And then sometimes we're in collapse a long time, and then we do something really risk-taking, and it shifts us back. up into flight, fight, and mobilizing. And then I want to invite you to just check and see, maybe there's some nice kind of more, a little more solid, a little more grounded energy in there now as you're on your healing journey. And then we can work with this. This is the beauty of working somatically. We can invite a felt sense, just a little moment in time. Doesn't have to be anything big where you feel okay. Maybe it's right now when we're here all together in this wonderful group, holding this space for each other. Or it might be a moment that you recall or imagine where you're connected to a person that you care about, your partner, trees, the wind, your cat or your dog. And just notice that place. And where does that place live in your body? Where do you feel it the most? And I just invite you to put a hand there where you feel it the most. And sometimes bodies move slowly, so your body may need time to find that place. And you can always just imagine one of what it would be like to have this beautiful moment of connection where you felt safe inside. And then see if you can find step 3 in focusing the handle. So maybe it's a word, or it might be an image, a picture, or it might be a movement in your body. Something that really captures the quality of this moment that feels okay. Or it might be a body card that you could make. You could download all of these things on my website, or write something about it. But see if you can find something that describes that, so that you can come back here. You can find it again. That's the handle for finding this moment again to use as a resource when you feel like you're losing it. And you can do this as a practice every morning when you wake up, every night, during the day. It's in you. Our wisdom is in our bodies, and it's together with all of us here together. And sometimes when we can't find this place inside, we can borrow it from each other, like right now. So we're just going to start to round it off by breathing into it. And step 6 in focusing is welcoming whatever came for you in this practice today. However uncomfortable a moment might have been, we welcome all of it. As we have to find a way to walk through these uncomfortable places together in order to be able to heal. So, feeling your feet on the floor, And slowly coming back to our group, rounding it off inside. And you might just want to take a minute just to make a little note to yourself. Maybe write down your handle. Handles can be really funny, kind of poetic sounding things like thick and wiggly, funny words that come from the body. Yeah. Just coming back to the room, taking your time. This is where it's really nice too. Often when I present, I give a 10-minute break here and people make a body card. You might do what we call a process recording. Patrick, I'm going to turn it over to you for Q&A.
Wow, Jan.
Is
was
that good?
beautiful. Oh, that was a beautiful presentation, Jan.